Okay. Hi, Jeremiah. How are you?
Oh, doing just fine. Yourself?
Oh, doing great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on this show. It's nice to
Thanks for
have you
having me.
here. So, you are an award-winning photographer and travel writer. You've got three books out, and your latest one is called On to Plan C. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay. There's many, many travel books out there. Is there something unique about yours, a different way that you've written them, or a different approach to it?
Well, for this book in particular, the latest one, two things were different to what I had done before, which was first, my first two books were just writing, no photography, and also they focused on past travels, sort of just tales and adventures, versus the newest book was the return to travel after COVID. So I wanted to, one sort of document, how the world had changed, how it hadn't changed, so to sort of give a moment in time. And then also I said it includes my photography. So the first chapter is on Fiji, which is my return to travel, and then there's photos from that trip. So it's sort of a combination, travel log and photography portfolio.
Okay, I'm going to work a little bit backwards here. We'll start with the first book, and then I want to go back to your other books
Okay, sounds
that you
good.
did. So, what changed? I mean, everybody went through COVID. It was miserable. We were pretty much, forbidden to travel for a few
Yes.
years. So now that things have gone back to normal somewhat, what has changed?
So I returned in 2022, and it was still sort of, so I mentioned Fiji was the first trip, and that was because that was the first trip canceled in 2020. And I still had a travel credit and figured, okay, that's the way to resume. A few months before that trip, I was still watching the guidelines were changing in terms of testing and entry requirements. In fact, they changed just 2 weeks before I left. So, having to keep an eye on that was, different. When we got to Fiji, just before we had arrived, they were doing this sort of contact tracing. And so they had stopped doing it, but you could see everything still had QR codes. So, like if you got in a taxi, you were supposed to download an app, scan the code. So, that was remnants of that were still there. So, that was a little different. And then I would also say, one thing I noticed in my own traveling is everywhere I went for that first year, so this was, the book covers summer 2022 into the beginning of 2023. I added more time. I would add an extra day or two just because I wasn't sure. Something might be closed that would normally be open, or maybe something had changed. So I just had to slow down a little bit, give myself extra time, and also just be a little more flexible. Um, in general, I would say, it's pretty much back to normal. I included some headlines. My summer trip, summer 2022, was being called like Travel Mageddon. It was supposed to be all these lost bags and long queues. And the reality was it wasn't. It was, pretty much it took a little longer to get the bags, but, it's pretty much back to normal. Just with that sense of, but at any point in time, it could go back. And you always had a mask in your pocket because you just never knew.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. If any of that is still being applied in any countries that you know of, like uh, proof of vaccines or quarantine periods or any of that kind of stuff, or is that pretty much all gone now?
It's pretty much all gone. However, so for instance, my next trip is going to be sailing up West Africa, and there's a couple countries where it's not necessarily required, but it's highly recommended. Have that vaccination card on you just in case it changes or just in case they ask. So, I have a new passport holder that pretty much has my passport and my COVID, and then I also have my yellow fever vaccination booklet because you just never know.
Are the places that you travel and have traveled, are they more on the side of the exotic, rather like adventure travel, rather than the more touristy places?
I try to get off the beaten path when I can. It just it has more appeal to me. So, my first big international trip was Tibet, which is not most people's first big trip. And then that was followed by Copper Canyon in Mexico, and then a few weeks in Peru. I have a particular love of ruins, so places like Machu Picchu are very appealing to me. And also, if I do go somewhere that's more conventional, I like to try to find, okay, talk to the locals. Where do you go? I had a friend of mine years ago sort of taught me when you go to a tourist area, wander off 2 or 3 blocks, and then you have where the locals go. And those are the better restaurants and those are the better markets. And so I've tried to maintain that throughout my travels.
So are you more of the backpack set rather than the five-star hotel set? Yeah.
I used to be, as I've gotten a little older and a few aches and pains, I'm more hotel, but definitely not 5-star. Yeah, I would rather spend that money for more travel.
I guess I should ask, where haven't you been yet that you want to go?
So this next trip, I'm gonna well this the end by the end of this year, I'm gonna satisfy two of my travel goals, which is I'm gonna exceed 100 countries and I'm gonna be to all 7 continents. I'm just missing Antarctica, and I'm hoping to do that in December. So I've never had a dream of going to every country, partly because I started a little late, and also just there's certain countries that they're so difficult to get into. I just don't know. That said, there are some areas. So, for instance, I've always wanted to go to Yemen. Not a safe place right now, but there's some architecture there that is very unique to that region. And there's an island to the south of the country that has these trees that are just they only grow on this island. So, someday I'm really hoping to make it there. I live in Los Angeles, so I've been to all the Central American countries. I still have quite a few South American countries. So I'd very much I've been trying to plan a trip next summer to Paraguay. I've been all around Paraguay, but I didn't make it to Paraguay itself. So that's somewhere else I'd like to go. I also have a love of Asia. So Bhutan is a big omission I've not made to yet. I've been to India, but India is vast. I would definitely like to go back and explore more. Likewise with China, I've been to China several times. In fact, I did a trip traveling the whole length of the country, east to west. But that was just a fraction. There's so many regions there I'd like to get back to. So as the world opens up and it becomes a little more accessible, and depending upon the world situation, there's still plenty more to see. I'm just going to be a little more particular.
Is there any place or places that you have been that you would not recommend people to go, or you had a bad experience or something like that?
Yeah, I can say I've had 2 bad experiences in the Caribbean now, one in Jamaica and one in Grenada. And so those sort of, thankfully this past winter, 2 winters ago, I'm sorry, I completed all the Caribbean islands. So I've ticked that off. And it was just in the case of Grenada, it was actually the locals, very unfriendly. And in the case of Jamaica, partly I wasn't feeling very well, so that did not help. But same sort of thing. There was a bit of a hostility there and a bit of a pressure that I personally didn't care for. I wouldn't necessarily say not go, but I've been to the west and the east of Jamaica now, had a not the best experience both times. So for me, it's like I'm glad I've done it, but I have no rush on getting back to the Caribbean.
So what is the takeaway from your books for people that haven't read them? What if somebody buys one of your books, what can they expect?
So the first book, if you just want sort of travel tales from in that point, 15 years of travel, 6 continents, and you just want little bite-sized pieces, that's what the first book was about. So I shared For instance, I spent my 40th birthday in Paris with no money and no ID because I had been pickpocketed on the metro. So I like to include things like that because sometimes it doesn't work out. Or a time in Bolivia, I was smuggled across a border because while I didn't leave the country, they had a passport check that no one told me about. Um, things like that. If you want to, the good and the bad, that's the book for you. This most recent book, I said I wanted to change rather than looking back on my travels. I wanted to focus on the current travels, and also I mentioned include the photography. And I was very conscious with the photography. I mentioned COVID. I talked about masking. So, for instance, flying into Berlin, no problem. Leaving Berlin, you must wear a mask. We asked why. Oh, that's the law. Okay, no one told the flight coming in. Yeah. But the photos, I didn't. I didn't include stacks of luggage. I didn't include people wearing masks. I just wanted to kind of show how the world's gone back. And so, if you're more interested in the photographic aspect, then the newest book has that. And I'm planning all future books to also include the photography.
Okay, you mentioned Antarctica. How does one go there? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's set up for tourism.
Basically, there's two ways. The main way, which is the way I'm going to do it, is cruise ship. So you leave out of Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in South America. You go across the Drake Passage, which can be incredibly rough. And then you cruise around bits of Antarctica, some boats. You can, you can't dock in Antarctica, but you can get on smaller boats and actually go ashore. That's how most people do it. There's now a company out of Cape Town in South Africa that you can actually fly. It's a 3 or 4 hour flight. They've leveled out a landing spot, and you can either just go fly 3 hours, fly back, or they actually have like week-long adventures, and you're staying in igloos. Not doing that one because that one's incredibly expensive.
Well, I think that's the one I've seen that people have done where it's sort of an all paid adventure where
Yes.
igloos, exactly. Because,
Yeah, I mean, it looks fascinating. If I win the lottery someday, I will do it.
well, how much does that cost? I'm curious.
I believe the 3 hour one. So you fly down, you spend 3 hours, and you come back. That's about $12,000. So, and if you want to do the actual full adventure, we're probably over 20,000. Now the cruises, depending upon what you take, can also be up to that expensive. I mean, the one I'm doing is not, but you could easily, for instance, Viking Cruise Lines now has a basic Antarctica trip. I think it's around $15,000. So it's about the same, but you have to ask yourself, do you want to spend that money for maybe 2 weeks or just flying and spending 3 hours?
From what I remember, that there really isn't anything there other than the science station on the South Pole, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's numerous science stations. Antarctica is not claimed by any particular country, but several countries have stations. So I said, yeah, even if you dock, you just wander the shore a bit. For me, what's more interesting is like South Georgia Island, Falkland Islands, areas relatively close. It gives you something a little different. But again, for me, there's 7 continents. I've always wanted to reach all 7. I'll finally get a chance to set foot and say I've been to Antarctica. Can't count it as a country, but I've been.
Well, Jeremiah, I think on that we're going to wind this down. So the latest book again is called On to Plan C. Has it been released?
Yes, it has.
Okay. And the last question is, do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes, I do. So if anyone's interested, they can go to jeremiahgilbert.com. You can click on books if you want to read about the 3 books and what's different about them. You can click on portfolio if you'd like to look at select photos. You can click on update if you want to see what I've been up to. I'm currently sharing photos from a recent trip to Australia and New Zealand. Also, at the bottom of the homepage, you can click and it'll take you to my Instagram.
Well, thank you for coming on this show. It was nice meeting you and chatting with you, and best of luck with your books and with your travels.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.